What's happening, troops? If you've ever watched a Huey rip across the sky and thought, how the hell do I fly that without nosediving into a tree?
Nice.
This one's for you. Today we are covering everything that you need to know about flying helicopters in Arma Reforger, and by the end of this you'll know how to acquire a chopper, set your custom controls, some of the do's and don'ts, and tricks to keep your bird in the fight. Let's go! Let's take a minute to talk about the history behind the birds we're going to be flying. These aren't just video game models, they are icons of military aviation. The Mi-8, codenamed HIP by NATO, is a Soviet-era workhorse. First introduced in the 1960s, it's one of the most produced helicopters in history, with over 17,000 of these built. This thing has been used in over 80 countries, from Afghanistan to Syria, and even played a tragic but heroic role in the Chernobyl disaster, where crews flew directly over Reactor 4, dropping sand and boron in a desperate attempt to contain the meltdown. It's a heavy lifting, combat tested beast that's still in service today, with modern variants flying in active war zones in Ukraine. The Mi-8 is durable, rugged and versatile. It's basically the AK-47 of helicopters. In this guide, we will be using the Mi-8 to illustrate the helicopter mechanics for console players in Arma Reforger. This guide does also apply to helis for the American side. If you can learn to fly the Mi-8, the American Huey will feel like a walk in the park. Let's get started. Before you can take to the skies, you'll need to acquire a helicopter in-game. In the vanilla servers for the conflict mode, helicopters can be requested at a base once your team has the proper infrastructure. MOBs are usually further from the front lines and have a larger supply capacity, making them ideal for launching helicopters. The helipad construction is required as a dedicated landing pad to spawn helicopters, so at your capture base, use the building menu, which can be found inside your command tent. To build a helipad, you're going to need the rank of sergeant, and it's going to cost you about 450 supplies. If the helipad option is greyed out in the menu, then that means you're going to need to rank up first. Once you've placed and built the helipad, approach the base's vehicle management point. From the menu, select the helicopter, for example the Mi-8 for Soviets, or the UH-1H for US, and spawn it. There are now 3 options as of 1.3. As the rank of sergeant, you can spawn in supply choppers, which can ferry troops and supplies. Lieutenant is required for a gunship. This comes equipped with front and rear gunners. And the third option is a gunship equipped with a variety of rocketpods, which requires the rank of captain. Spawning a heli will consume a large amount of supplies, so make sure the base has enough stocked and you're not leaving the base completely depleted of supplies. Once selected, you'll be able to place the helicopter within your base. Make sure you give yourself enough space to take off from. And now your shiny new chopper is ready. Let's get into the cockpit and go over the basic controls for console players. Flying with default Arma controls is like trying to juggle while riding a unicycle. The inverted scheme makes everything so much harder than it needs to be, so I use a custom PS5 control layout that makes it much more intuitive. On screen now you can see the controls I use, which makes flying more like what you'd expect in games like GTA, rather than the traditional inverted control scheme used by Bohemia and Arma. Take a screenshot of this before the PC Master Race come for us in the comments. In terms of the controls, I'm going to keep this as simple as possible. Simply, it's square to enter the vehicle. To start the engine, you want to hold down triangle, and with the new custom controls that you've mapped out, it will be R2 to ascend and L2 to descend. On the left stick, it will be for horizontal movement, so changing the camera, and the right stick is going to be your pitch and your tilt, so moving forward or moving backwards. We're now going to look at the pre-flight checks. Before takeoff, have a quick look around, ensure the area is clear of any obstacles. You don't want to be smashing into a tree or a vehicle. Also check you have enough fuel. New helicopters should spawn full, but it's good practice to glance at the fuel gauge. When starting the engine, you'll hear and see the rotor spin up, and it will take several seconds for the engines to get to full power. If this is your first time flying, you should also test shutting down the engine, and to do this, hold triangle again while holding the left stick down. To get the bird in the air, it's really simple. So to ascend, just hold in R2. This will get you in the air, and from there, small gradual inputs are key. For example, the right stick forward will dip the nose and make the helicopter accelerate forward. Pulling it back will slow it down or fly backwards. To rotate or turn the helicopter left or right without tilting, use the left stick. This is your anti-torque control. Gently push left to yaw the helicopter left and right to turn right. Use yaw to adjust heading, especially when hovering or lining up with a landing spot. When taking off, try and be cautious. Descending too fast straight down can be risky. You can get caught up in your own downdraft. It's safer to descend gradually or with some forward movement. If you need to drop quickly, do it in short bursts and level out periodically to avoid losing lift suddenly. I always find when landing that I need to find a balance between descending with L2 whilst occasionally giving the chopper some lift with R2 so as not to land too harshly and damage the chopper. For a smooth takeoff, slowly increase the collective with R2. The helicopter will then lighten and lift off. Once you're a few meters up, nudge the right stick forward to start moving forward and gain translational lift, which makes flying easier and much more stable. Now you're in the air. Now let's try to land. First, what you want to do is slow down and enter a hover over your intended landing zone. Gradually reduce the throttle to start descending. As you come down, again feather the collective, ease up a bit if you're dropping too fast. Try to keep the helicopter level with the right stick and use tiny yaw inputs to stay orientated. Just before touchdown, flare slightly, so pull back to raise the nose and add a touch of collective to slow your descent, then throttle down to settle onto the ground. Once you're on the ground, you can hold the wheel brake, which is cross on the PS5 or X, or hold L2 to remain on the ground to prevent sliding. You can also cut the engine off if needed, and to do that, hold triangle and pull down on the left trigger. In terms of the camera views, you can fly in first person, which is the cockpit view, or third person by holding start. In third person, the game provides a small HUD with basic info such as altitude and speed around the helicopter. In first person, you rely on the helicopter's instruments, which can be more difficult. Beginners may find it easier to fly in third person for a better situational awareness, then switch to first person when they want a more immersive experience or to read detailed gauges. If you need to look around without turning the helicopter, you can enable free look. By default, you can hold R1 to temporarily unlock the camera. This allows you to look without affecting the flight controls. This is useful to scan for landing obstacles or threats while flying straight. You'll want to take a minute to practice these controls. It does take a little bit of getting used to, so you can do this in a safe area of the map or in something like Game Master, which is a solo scenario. That way you're not pissing off your teammates by constantly crashing helicopters. Next up, we are going to cover the helicopter roles and its use cases. Why even go through all that trouble of flying a chopper? Because a well-used helicopter can be a game changer on the battlefield. Here are the primary use cases for the MI8 and other helis in Arma Reforger. The first one is fairly obvious, and that is troop transport. Helicopters excel at moving squads quickly across the map. The MI8 can carry up to 15 passengers, which is around 2.5 full squads, in its unarmed transport configuration, while the American Huey carries up to 8. This means you can pick up teammates at bases and insert them at forward locations in a fraction of the time it would take to go on foot or by truck. Use the helicopter to deploy infantry to key objectives, such as flanking positions or behind enemy lines for surprise attacks. Coordinating with your team via platoon chat or unit chat to organise pickups and drop-offs is hugely effective.
Go, 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 go.
If you can make your team aware of which base you're consistently picking up friendlies from, you'll be able to get large amounts of friendlies to the front line. When it comes to helis, the more people you can get into the heli for drop-off, the more effective they will be at capturing bases. Another use case for helis is aerial reconnaissance. From the sky, you've got a top-down view of the battlefield. Use the helicopter to scout enemy movements, spot vehicles, or locate enemy bases from a safe distance. Communicate what you see to your team. Just having a human eye in the sky is valuable. You can also ferry a spotter or squad leader who can observe and then jump out at an observation point. Keep in mind to stay relatively high or at a distance to avoid small arms fire when doing recon. These choppers are not just for troops, they can also ferry supplies and as of the 1.3 update, it's about 750 to 1,000 supplies depending on the helicopter. In the Arma Reforger logistics system, supplies are physical items that you can load into vehicles. You can load supply crates or use the interaction menu to load supplies onto the chopper at a helipad or supply depot marked on the map, and then fly those supplies to a remote base that needs resources. This is much faster than driving a truck across the island, but also much riskier if you lose the chopper. A single helicopter run can quite easily turn the tide by enabling forward bases to be built up and armed. One of my favourite use cases for the helicopter, and I'm sure I'm not alone here, is using helis and Arma Reforger as gunship support. Both the Russian and Americans have choppers which are equipped with door-mounted machine guns. The MIA in particular has a front and rear gun mount of the armed variant, whereas the Huey has two side gunships. If you have crewmen or passengers on the guns, a helicopter can strafe enemy infantry or vehicles with suppressive fire. Use this for gunship support in a pinch.
At least one guy there.
For example, circle an area while door gunners lay down fire on enemy positions to support a friendly squad's advance. Be careful not to linger too long though, as helicopters are of course vulnerable to group ground attacks from RPGs and small arms. Coordinating with a gunner player is key. As a pilot, keep the helicopter relatively steady or in a slow banking turn so the gunners can aim and communicate targets. Next up, we are going to look at some do's and don'ts for beginner pilots. When learning to fly, certain habits can make you or break you. Here are some do's and don'ts to guide some rookie pilots. Starting off with the do's, the first thing would be maintain situational awareness. Keep checking your surroundings. You can use third-person view or quick glances to ensure you know where the ground, obstacles and threats are. Awareness will prevent crashes into trees and avoid wandering into enemy RPG positions. You'll also want to keep moving. A moving helicopter is harder to hit, of course. If you need to provide support, consider doing a slow circle or orbit rather than hovering in place. Constant slight movement can throw off enemy aim and avoids giving them an easy target. Communication is important, not just in helicopters but in Arma in general. Let your team know you're available for transport or supply runs.
60 seconds.
Coordinate those pickup points. You can provide a rendezvous point at any base camp for a heli ride to the objective, and make sure our passengers know when to jump out.
Go.
You can communicate 30 seconds out, get ready, that way everyone on board is ready to jump as soon as you land and you're not waiting about to get hit by an RPG. You'll also want to check your fuel gauge before flights. If it's low, you can refuel at a fuel station or bring a fuel truck. Running out of fuel mid-flight is a deadly forced landing. If you've taken damage, the engine or rotor hits will be indicated by warning lights and the HUD will light up. Consider heading back to base for repairs. The MIA is tough, but a damaged tail rotor or engine can quickly lead to loss of control. Even though staying still in combat is bad, being able to hover stably is important for precise landings. Practice holding the chopper steady at a fixed point a few metres off the ground. It will improve your fine control. Use small corrective inputs rather than big stick movements. Let's look at some of the things that you'll want to avoid. This is the #1 rule. A stationary helicopter will attract RPGs, machine gun fire and all sorts of bad guys. If you must hover to drop off troops, keep it as brief as humanly possible, otherwise always be moving or vary your altitude. Oftentimes I see choppers flying extremely high for no reason whatsoever, and while altitude can keep you safe from small arms, flying very high can make you visible to everyone and can be risky if the enemy has a chopper in the air as well. Also in Reforger, the higher you are, the further away from cover you are, allowing heavy MGs to shoot you down. A moderate altitude, so like a little bit above the tree level, is usually ideal. High enough to avoid small arms, but low enough to use the terrain for cover. You'll also want to avoid coming in too hot without first scouting. Charging into an area without checking for threats or planning your landing is a recipe for disaster. Do a quick recon of an LZ if possible, maybe circle at a distance or have someone on the ground pop smoke at a secure landing point. Randomly drop them into the unknown is risky. Again, this is another one for the LZ, and it might sound basic, but many new pilots fixate on the landing spot and forget about the hazards around it. Tall trees, telephone poles, any other objects can ruin your day. Always approach an LZ from the direction with the least obstacles, and when taking off, go straight up a bit before moving forward if surrounded by trees. If you're in a gunship, this one is for you. If you're using that armed variant, the door guns have limited ammo. You'll need to land and rearm at a base or ammo trunk occasionally, and always refuel after a long sortie. Final tip from me is knowing when to disengage. Any pro knows that sometimes it's better to retreat and live to fight another day. If your heli is badly damaged, such as engine smoking or the controls start to feel a little bit sluggish, or you're solo and suddenly taking heavy fire, don't push your luck. Break off, return to base for repairs and wait for friendly to join you. There's no shame in waving off and coming back for a second try after re-evaluating. In fact, your team will probably appreciate having a helicopter that stays alive for multiple runs rather than a fiery wreck after the first. And that is it, guys. Congratulations, you've now got the knowledge to be a competent helicopter pilot in Arma Reforger. We've covered how to unlock and acquire the bird, the basic controls for flight, and many of the ways that you can use a helicopter to help your team and win. Helicopter piloting is very, very fun in Arma Reforger, and it's a skill that improves greatly with practice and with time. So don't be discouraged by a few rough landings early on. Learn from each mistake, everyone's been there, but with enough practice you'll be performing smooth insertions in no time. So hop into that cockpit, soldier, and take to the skies. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you did, make sure to smash that like button and subscribe for more Arma guides. Now get out there and own the skies of Evron, and I'll see you on the battlefield.